Well, here we go again. We're going back to John now. We're going to talk about now some of the owners that had taken over North Quay, Ale Harbour, well, during John's time down there. Over to you, John.
1970. When I arrived in Hale, it was then owned by the company Harvey's or their successors. Within a few months of my arrival, I believe they became Harvey's UBM, United Builders Merchants. Eventually, the name Harvey's was dropped and they simply became a part of history. Fast forward to 1983, and UBM decided to divest themselves of the harbour as an asset. And that was then sold to a company from Woodley Salterton in Devon. And that company's name was Tekoa, Tekoa. Strange name, but it turns out that it gets a mention in the Bible. And the only mention it has is somebody being banished to the wilderness of Tekoa. And I've never found the time to pick up a Bible and find that. However, they were primarily interested in sand extraction, gravel, hardcore, blockworks, whatever it is they did. And from 83 to 88, that's how long they were here, they didn't do anything in the way of construction, but they did quite a bit in the way of demolition, including, I might add, what used to be known colloquially as the Roman Wall, which was part of Harvey's foundry, which was done after the fashion of Victorian building design. It did indeed look like a Roman wall. However, that was demolished, quote, for health and safety reasons, which is a great excuse for getting rid of old buildings when they should be left standing. However, they eventually left, and in 1988, we had the most prominent harbour owner, which was Peter de Savary. He arrived with a fanfare. Wherever he went, there was, exaggerating slightly, there's a brass band in front of him. He always smoked a large cigar. He dressed very smartly. He spoke very positively and set up a number of meetings by members of the public at Land's End Hotel, no less, because he had already bought the hotel, for residents of Hale and elsewhere to come and give their opinions on the development of the harbour. That meeting mostly went all right, but there were a number of people who absolutely lived nowhere near Hale who took it upon themselves to say that you don't know what's best for Hale, we do. And those people live as far away as Falmouth, however. So there were great plans laid out, an exhibition put on, plans, models, it was done very thoroughly. But by 1992, there was another recession. It wasn't called it at the time, but there was a slowing down of the housing market. And Peter de Savary was already busy buildings in Falmouth, in Port. I can't think of the name of it now.
Is it Sandane? By the Trago.
Yes,
That's
Port.
right, yeah.
What is that place? Anyway, there was a housing development in Falmouth on the waterfront. The properties there cost £250,000. You wouldn't get a house for that today, but in those days that was a lot of money. However, with the mini recession, we will call it, housing interest failed. So it ended up with the housing being occupied by people on benefits. That was a long time ago. That was well over 30 years ago. And since then, of course, the benefits people have been moved into more appropriate housing, and the properties put up by the Savory have earned their keep at last. After the Savory, he pulled out of Cornwall entirely, other than owning the Land's End Hotel. He went to America to pursue his American interests, and we never saw or heard from him again. And in 1996, another company came. This consisted of two men from Lancashire, a Mr. Clayton and a Mr. Carruthers. And we learned later that their backgrounds were not in marine matters, but in land and property. One was in road transport, the other was in renting yards, sheds, fields, disposing of waste, etc., etc. But they saw Hale Harbour as a possible way of making their proper fortunes. So they came in, took over. And it was quickly very clear that they knew nothing at all about marine matters. To give an example, I was at the Harbour Office door one day, looking across the harbour, and Mr. Carruthers stepped out the door behind me and said to me, "Is that water getting higher?" I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Really, well, what's causing that then?" I said, "Where's the tide?" Oh, he was very interested to hear that. How often does the tide do that? So, this was a man who called himself the harbour manager. However, things went from bad to worse under those two, and eventually they were displaced by another company, ING. Now, they had borrowed money from ING to give themselves an air of respectability, which they didn't really possess. When they could not meet their financial obligations, ING decided to foreclose on them and assume ownership of the property. This was done in a very straightforward, no-nonsense manner. That is to say, they turned up one day in August of what year did they come? 80,